Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Brain Awareness Week 2024, Healthy Lifestyle Habits for a Healthy Brain. Tonight, we are going to be focusing on social support, and we are joined by Dr. Erika Pugh. We also have here Anthony Robinson. Anthony and I will be moderating the chat, so if you have any questions during Dr. Pugh's discussion, please feel free to leave it in the chat, and Anthony and I will be watching that, and the questions and comments will be presented to Dr. Pugh at the end to make things more streamlined, and we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for that. So, Dr. Pugh, I will let you introduce yourself. Nope, Dr. Pugh, I believe you're muted. There we go.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yep,
Perfect.
we got you.
And so I also have a bit of an introduction slide that goes a bit more into my background, but I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at The Ohio State University. Much of the work that I'm doing now is within the realm of clinical and cognitive neuroscience, focusing on intervention work, so lifestyle interventions, also looking at some of the neural correlates of the intervention response, in addition to creating more culturally tailored lifestyle interventions and learning more about blood-based biomarkers. So that's kind of my newest interest as well. But I do have a bit more information about, the winding road that led me here.
All right, great.
And so all right. And so I'm very happy to be here at the this year's Brain Awareness Week for SBN. For those of you that don't know, I am involved in SBN as well as the research director. And so I'm happy to be able to support the organization in our efforts to spread brain health awareness. And just to give you a bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about today, first I'll give you a very broad-based overview of lifestyle factors in brain health. A lot of this may be repetitious at this point on day 3, but the bulk of our discussion today will be focused on social activity in brain health. And then I'll go into how you can take these more specific steps into trying to increase social engagement and overcome some of the barriers to social engagement. And so a little bit about me, and I apologize in advance for the slides. I created this in PowerPoint, but had to change it to Google Slideshow, so they may look a bit busy. However, I got my bachelor's degree in psychology from University of Tennessee at Martin. And then after that, I made my way up to Buffalo because I apparently love snowstorms. And there I focused on cognitive and behavioral neuroscience in clinical populations and used EEG methodology. I spent a few years at Yale University as a CRC for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Unit. I got my PhD from Louisiana State University, go Tigers, with the emphasis on neuropsychology. My degree is in clinical psychology, and most of my work during my graduate training was in multicultural neuropsychology. And I also, and I believe the next one on internship, I did my internship at MGH in Harvard Medical School with the multicultural assessment in research center, as well as the multicultural Alzheimer's prevention program. And like I said, now I'm currently a postdoc at The Ohio State University, working with the clinical neuroscience lab under Dr. Ruchika Prakash. And to get into today's topic, so why should we talk about some of these lifestyle factors? At this point, like I said, some of this will be familiar to you, but we wanted to focus this week on ways that we can modify things that are known to be risks for the later development of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease related dementia, and what changes can be made to kind of mitigate that. And so far, you've learned about stress management and sleep, but today we'll focus a bit on social engagement and how that has direct relationships to cognitive health, and also on a neuroanatomical level. So there's evidence that these lifestyle factors are important in promoting not just physical health, but also cognitive health. And so you'll learn a bit more about this at the next session, but exercise is super important. What's good for your heart is also generally good for your brain. But as we learn more about some of these specific modifiable risk factors, we'll see that these risk factors and changing them are directly related to changes in brain structure, directly related to improving cognition. So not just your thinking skills overall, but also in these specific domains, including some of these more complex cognitive domains or skills, such as executive functioning. And then there's also evidence that intervening in these lifestyle factors and lowering risk can lead to slow cognitive decline over time. And although there's a certain amount of a decline in cognition that's expected with aging, um, intervening with some of these factors can lead to a slower decline above and beyond what would be expected. Then also a risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. I'll refer to them as ADRDs moving forward because it's a bit of a mouthful. And again, apologize for the format, but just to kind of highlight how impactful this can be, I just wanted to point out the finger study. And so this was an intervention, a large randomized control trial where they had a control group that just learned general health advice compared to an intervention group that learned more specific advice. So managing some of these risk factors like physical exercise, social activities, cognitive training. And the intervention group actually found a distinct benefit and a cognitive benefit, very significant cognitive benefit compared to the control group. And that is just one example and there are also some other large RCTs that also show the evidence for the importance of managing these risk factors for cognitive health. And so to talk a bit about being socializing and what that has to do with brain health, I first want to start with a quote from Angela Davis. It's a quote from her book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And she says that it is in these collectivities that we find reservoirs of hope and optimism. And I included this quote here because I feel that it highlights the importance of these social connections and the being connected to others, especially when we're faced with struggles or when we're feeling like we don't have much hope and things of that nature, and how all of these things interact to improve like your brain health and your overall health. And just remembering that we're all interconnected and it's really important for us to, feed off of that and feed into that. And I want to go over a few terms. So to delineate some of the things that we'll discuss today, we have social engagement, and you can think of social engagement as a bit more of like the social activity piece. And so engaging in things with other people. And social engagement could include, going to the movies with someone or going for a walk with friends. And it's a way to help you feel a bit more connected to other people. And you're doing some of these purposeful activities that help you maintain meaningful relationships. And then there's social support. And social support can be seen as sort of this subset of social engagement. And so this is receiving direct benefits from your social connections. And this could be things such as emotional support or receiving information from people or people, someone taking out the trash because you're feeling sick. And these types of acts of support can help you feel more in tune with that person. So a closer relationship in addition to improving your sense of well-being and overall quality of life. And then related to these two terms is loneliness, which is a negative feeling that results from there being a disconnect between what you're seeking in your social connection. So that could be the depth of the social connections, the number, the type of support you're receiving, as it relates to what you actually have. And so keeping in mind that uh, there's not one size fits all. Some people need less or seek less social connectedness than others, and that's just kind of where their homeostasis is, where their equilibrium is. And so just keeping in mind that loneliness is that disconnect. And to delve a bit more into the types of social support, of course, the one that's we're probably all most familiar with is emotional support. So this could be um, someone being compassionate, loving, trusting, empathetic, thinking about who you would consider your confidant or who you would trust the most. There's also instrumental support, and this is, like I mentioned, the more tangible aid that someone could give you. So babysitting your kid while you're at work or something of that nature. There's also informational support, at getting advice, suggestions, information from other people, and that can help you solve problems or think through like complex situations. And then there's also a type of support called appraisal support. And that's when an individual can provide you with information that's helpful in evaluating yourself. And so, for example, let's say you have a friend that runs several miles a week, and they go on and on about the benefits of running and how it's like impacted their health. And then you reflect and realize that you don't exercise much, you're pretty sedentary. And then you start to consider what impact running may have on your health or what benefits you may incur from running. And so using this information to kind of appraise where you are and evaluate your current standing. And there are also certain components of connectedness. And when you think about it, you can think about it across the features of the social connection, the function that it serves, and then also the quality of the social connection. And so starting with the features, that could be who makes up your group. So what's their age, their background, how frequently do you see them, how long do you see them for, what types of activities do you engage in? Do you generally engage in activities as an individual, as a group? And so all these other things that I won't read to you. There's also the functional components. And so thinking back to some of the types of support that I just touched on, what function do these relationships serve? So what do you get out of these relationships? Do you get deep emotional support? Is this person providing you with things that are helpful? Are they giving you knowledge? So if you think about the intergenerational dynamic, is this an older person that's telling you a bit about their experiences in a way that can help you, navigate your own life? And is it a one-way street of a relationship? Is someone, giving it their all while the other isn't? And so thinking about some of the functions that these different connections serve. And I think one aspect that we don't think about very often is what is our experience when we're with these different social connections. So are we having fun? Is it meaningful? How satisfied are we with the relationship? And I think really important, especially to minoritized individual, the sense of belonging. Do we feel this sense of belonging when we're interacting with these individuals? And do we feel supported? And keeping that in mind, there are a lot of factors that can impact social connections. And so, it could be personality. We all have friends that we're a bit more similar to, that we're different from in a way where we can still, make the relationship or find it meaningful and fulfilling. But then thinking about like cultural context, there's some research that suggests that individuals from like the global majority, minoritized individuals, they tend to seek relationships that are more fulfilling or more quality relationships, but fewer of those relationships. And so a term that I didn't touch on at the beginning was social network. And social network, you can think of it as the number of social connections you have. And whereas there's some work in non-Hispanic white populations that relate brain health and well-being to social network size, so the number of people in your network, that's not necessarily so for people from different cultures, especially I'm thinking a bit about collectivist cultures as well. And so just keeping that in mind, especially as we talk about some of the implications for interventions or like the research that's been done already and how that may impact like, what we know so far. And so to speak more so on the brain health benefits, since we got the terms out of the way, social engagement has been directly related to prefrontal cortex and hippocampal volume. So thinking about the prefrontal cortex, some of these more complex, higher level thinking skills, as well as hippocampal volume, which is related to memory and directly implicated in Alzheimer's disease and memory disorders. And so you can see this in like even specific domains. And so processing speed, so how fast you think about things. There's benefit from engaging in social behaviors or social activities. Executive functioning, which we've talked about a lot, which has shown up across the literature as benefiting from social activities. There's also memory. And again, if you think about, like I mentioned, the areas of the brain that are implicated, these domains make sense as to having garnered benefit or showing benefit. And so I want to illustrate that with a specific study. So there was the Experience Core study by Carlson and colleagues, where they had adults age 50 and older worked with elementary age school children that were having difficulty reading, and they would work with those kids to read and engage in some of these purposeful social activities. And in this study, they found improved cognition related directly to some of these neuroanatomical correlates, so some of these brain areas, and it had a positive impact on overall brain size. And so going back to what I mentioned about there being a certain level of cognitive decline that's expected with old age, there's also a certain level of change in the size of your brain that's expected in old age as well. And so they even saw that these social activities impacted the brain size in addition to some of these specific regions. And in another study, they found that even when you account for physical activity and cognitive activity, thinking about physical activity and with what's good for your heart being good for your brain, in addition to some of the things that you've probably heard about as it relates to brain health. So engaging in, doing crossword puzzles, brain games, whatever it may be to keep your brain active. So even when accounting for these factors that people are a bit more familiar with, consistent social activity was significantly related to less cognitive decline over time. In addition to those studies, a meta-analysis of over 50 studies with over 100,000 participants found better overall cognition, including memory and executive functioning, slur rates of cognitive decline. You guys are starting to get the theme here, as well as fewer incidents of disability. So people being unable to work or having trouble with their daily life activities. In addition to that, a cross-sectional study of 2,500 older adults found that the frequency of social interactions were related to frequency and quality were related to different cognitive domains. And addition to this, social engagement is related to a reduced risk of developing ADRDs, even when accounting for demographic variables and these cognitively stimulating activities. Like I mentioned, the quality of the relationship and satisfaction with that relationship can be particularly important, especially when we're thinking about ethno-racially diverse individuals. But I would be remiss if I didn't take into account or spend time discussing some of the limitations of the work that's shown a relationship between social network and cognition. There are limited interventions, and randomized control trials are important in establishing a bit more of a causality or a stronger relationship. There's also the chicken or the egg argument, where it's possible that people that are more have healthier brains are more likely to seek out these cognitive activities, and so that's what we're seeing in the research. On the other side, it's possible that people that have engaged in less cognitive activity have less healthy brains, and then they're also, and thus they're participating in fewer cognitive activities, or they're less socially engaged. I said cognitive, I mean social activities, and they're less socially engaged. I do want to talk a bit about social activity and cognition and ethno-racially diverse individuals. And so thinking about the limitations I just mentioned, there are even more limitations in these groups, in part due to the fact that there's a lot of underrepresentation for in the research. And so there are some mixed findings on the impact of social engagement. I mentioned there are different cultural influences, and many studies are pretty homogenous. So most of their groups, most of their participants are, highly educated, non-Hispanic white individuals. And with that, the way they approach asking about social relationships or social activities come from this kind of like Western, very weird, like the weird science, so a very weird lens, so to speak. And with that, it's possible that we're missing some of these diverse impacts that social activity can have on brain health across ethno-racial groups. There have been findings where, so for example, in Black individuals, that women seem to benefit a bit more from the relationship between social activity and cognition is stronger in women than in man. There are also some differences in how people report their social activities or social engagement across ethno-racial group. And there's also, like I mentioned, the social network. So people focusing a bit more on social network size as opposed to the quality of the relationships and trying to draw connections between that and cognition, whereas they could be inadvertently missing this whole swath of people, and the importance of social connectedness for them because they're not asking the right questions, essentially. But overall, there seem to be some protective effects for cognition based off of social activity, even ethno-racial groups. However, some research doesn't demonstrates that it's equivalent, and so that between diverse groups, non-Hispanic white groups, they benefit similarly. Some research suggests that they may benefit less, even if there is some benefit to cognition. And so there's overall like a need for more research, more diverse samples. Again, that could be a whole nother talk too. And within this realm, you have to take into account social determinants of health and how they underlie a lot of the ethno-racial disparities and health disparities that we see. So socioeconomic status could impact whether someone can do they have a car where they can go to social activities or go to church, or access to software where they can stay connected via social media or whatever it may be. And there are also unique challenges faced by minoritized individuals in accessing some social activities. So if you think about the impact stereotype threat may have, and so being afraid that, if you're a part of the quote unquote out group, that people are going to perceive you a certain way, and that may make you less likely to interact with those around you, or, the impact of imposter syndrome, especially in college and graduate school, and how imposter syndrome can be exacerbated or worsened by being a part of like the perceived out group or feeling like you don't belong. And so there are these additional barriers that people from diverse backgrounds need to overcome sometimes to even access some of the benefits from social activities. And then, like I mentioned with the interventions, oftentimes not culturally tailored. So there's a need for interventions in general that focus on cultural relevancy and accessibility, and also that seek to recruit representative samples and honestly over sample certain groups that haven't been represented thus far or as much. Okay, so now let's talk about how does it help? And so how does social activity help brain health? So there are several theories of possible mechanisms for how this works. I'll go over a couple. There's, I would say the most prevalent is the stress reduction pathway, or more of like this buffering hypothesis. There's also like a cognitive reserve hypothesis. So you're using these cognitive functions, and so they're lasting longer, and it helps resist brain damage or brain pathology. And then there are other theories that focus on the support that you can get from people and how that impacts your health overall. But thinking about this stress reduction pathway, so if you have social support that helps lower your stress through, whatever means. So it could be the instrumental support, emotional support, XYZ, but that lower stress helps lower inflammation. So just inflammation in your body overall, but, including your brain. And then overall, that leads to better brain health. And then, like I mentioned, with the chicken and egg, like better brain health, you may be more likely to seek these social connections. And then you kind of go in this pathway. Other potential mechanisms include the fact that social activities can often occur while you're doing other behaviors. So you could be engaging in physical activity, so taking a walk with a friend, doing puzzles with friends, which lends itself to that use it or lose it hypothesis and building up some of this cognitive reserve. And then there's also the potential that the type of support that you receive from these social connections play a key part. So if someone's actively helping you with things, so like taking out the trash, cooking, etc., that can lighten your load. And if we go back to that stress hypothesis, lower your stress, lower inflammation, and then kind of feed into that circular mechanism. But then appraisal, like thinking about the friend that runs a lot and the benefits that they have, that could encourage you to engage in other activities that help increase brain health and lower risk of cognitive decline. And then also emotional support, because there's work that shows a relationship between some mood disorders, so depression, anxiety, whatever it may be, and difficulty with your thinking. And then again, we could talk about how inflammation may play a role as well. And so this slide, there's a bit of a spoiler at the end because of the new format, but there are risks of low social engagement. So keeping in mind the fact that size and composition of networks change as we age. And so as we age, people move, people get married, people pass away, we take new jobs, our interests change. And so as these social networks change, that's a risk if we're not actively kind of seeking the social connectedness or trying to replenish some of the lost relationships. The absence of significant social relationships can impact health, similar to smoking, alcohol use, high blood pressure, and it can also increase the risk of depression and cognitive decline. But the good news is it's not too late, because maintaining social relationships and establishing social relationships have been related to improve brain health. And let's see. And so thinking about the fact that the quote unquote it's not too late, you can create this supportive ecosystem, thinking both in terms of quality and variety. And so you may want to prioritize the most enjoyable relationships and the activities that you enjoy the most. Think about the exchange of ideas and how you communicate with these people. Who do you feel that you can communicate with most openly? Uh, who can you interact with regularly, and how can you build in these regular interactions? And keeping in mind that that does take time and planning, but can help deepen that relationship. You may seek to establish quality relationships by helping others, attending social functions, ensuring that people that you enjoy or want to see attend the social functions that you host. And then the use of technology. Technology can be a gift and a curse sometimes, but with with social networks being established, it's a pretty easy way to try to stay in contact with people. And when thinking about, varying your social support system and the types of activities that you engage in, you can try new activities. So thinking about new activities with your family, with the community around you, activities that you find culturally fulfilling. You can think about joining a group. It could be an online group, in-person group, but something that can, like a book club, where you can share interests and start building relationships with other people, teaching others. And the example that we discussed earlier, where the older adults worked with the children to help them read and, kind of teach them some of these reading skills, they still experience benefits, and that's still a way to connect with people, but in a varied capacity. And then seeking out ways where you can meet other people. And so this can be going to the park, going to places where there are a lot of other people around. So a coffee shop, whatever it may be, planning joint activities with other people, as well as interacting with people of different ages, and thinking about that intergenerational transfer of knowledge. Because sometimes I'm amazed at things that kids are observant of. And of course, older adults always have wisdom to share with us. To give you an example, in some studies where people volunteered, so reading with children or helping in a school library, they found improvements in memory and executive functioning, and then their levels of engagement were higher for several years later. And so showing that there's potentially some longer lasting benefits from even volunteering or whatever type of social connection you would like to make. Examples of other activities, I have a litany of them on this slide, but joining a club, a sports team, taking music lessons, games, cooking, especially with family, loved ones, that can be a very enriching activity, and then an activity that can bring you really close. And even if you don't have someone that you can think of that you would want to cook with, you can take a cooking class. Reaching out to someone who you haven't spoken to in a while can help deepen that relationship, but then also establish the importance of that relationship to you, both you and the person, because you reflect on who have you kind of missed and who would you like to reach out to. And although not everyone is in a place where they can adopt a pet or are interested in adopting pets, there's some evidence that animal companionship has benefits as well. And if you're someone who enjoys spending time with animals, you may want to consider volunteering in an animal shelter or those sorts of activities. And some more practical tips, simple acts of kindness. So smiling at people. I'm from the South, so there's always a smile and a good morning shared between us. You can show interest in other people, ask them how their day was, how their weekend was, because oftentimes we just get so caught up in our own experiences that we don't think that something as simple as that could really help foster a deeper connection. And practicing random acts of kindness. It doesn't have to be that you're buying the person behind you in line coffee, but it could be something as simple as holding the door or sharing an umbrella. And then, in addition to some of these simple acts that can help us establish newer connections, we can think about how we can reconnect with people that we have established relationships with already. So this could be calling the person on the phone. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't put shoot a text. So sending a text to someone, even if it's just a, I'm thinking about you, or I hope you're doing well sort of text, sending a card, an email. Again, social media is a pretty quick and easy way to connect with people. And then also seeking support from and leaning on the support systems that you already have. So easier said than done, not being afraid to ask for help, because people, those around you, are oftentimes more than willing to help you if you ask, once you kind of get over that initial hurdle. Joining social groups, even online social groups, but therapists, of course, as a clinical psych person, I think everybody could benefit from a therapist. In addition to, there are certain hotlines or texting services that you can reach out to for support, but then also religious leaders. So, if you go to church, mosque, whatever it may be regularly, leaning on those religious leaders for support can be really helpful and meaningful. But change is hard. And so I'm saying, like, hey, you can do this and you can do that, and easier said than done. But there are certain ways to increase your likelihood of being successful in making some of these changes. So keeping in mind how important social connectedness is for brain health, you can make the goals small and manageable, and track your progress. And I know there's probably a collective sigh in the chat, but SMART goals. So making sure you're, specific, and it's something that you can measure, and you're being realistic about what your goals are, because one surefire way to, kind of get off course is if you think too big and the goal is too big and seems almost inachievable. It's easy to give up. But being specific, realistic, and planning ahead can make a big difference. And to the extent possible, building some of these small changes into your daily routine. So maybe, every morning while you're waiting for your coffee to brew, you shoot a text to someone that you haven't heard from a while and say, like, hey, I was just thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. And so something as simple as that can help build that momentum too, as you move towards a change and increasing your social engagement. Leaning on your current support system, identifying barriers that could impact your ability to do these things, and to whatever extent possible, removing those barriers. And I think the last two are so important. Celebrate all wins. And so when you send off that text while you wait for your morning coffee, that's a win. Celebrate it. No matter how small it may seem, every step and every achieving even the smallest goal is very important. But also, be patient with yourself, give yourself grace, and show compassion, because change is hard and it takes time. Another important part of change is thinking about, like, what is your why? Why do you want to change towards more social engagement? And I have my biased answer because it's good for your brain. But what is your answer? And it may be different. Thinking about why it's important to you, and then continuing to remind yourself regularly as to why this is important, and to whatever extent possible, connecting it to things that you value, to other things that are very important to you as well. And just to summarize some of the steps that you can take to be more successful in incorporating some of the social engagement: small, realistic daily goals that fit into your routine, problem solving things ahead of time. So like, I don't have a ride. Maybe there's a way that maybe someone that could give you a ride to the tennis championship or whatever event you would like to attend. And then I think one of the things that impact us the most is motivation, because whenever we start something, everyone's so excited, but then over time, motivation kind of ebbs and flows. And things that impact motivation can look like avoidance. I think we've all had that. Oh, I'll start on Monday. moment when trying to make big changes. Being too broad, and so when something seems too big, it can impact your motivation. Not granting yourself that grace and that compassion, engaging in some of that negative self-talk. In addition to having this low on your priority list. And so you can say like, oh, well, I have to, you know, finish this manuscript, then I'll reach out to so-and-so. And then that's something that, can just keep perpetuating. There'll always be something that you can do instead of, achieving the goal that you set out for yourself. And another part can be perfectionism that can impact your ability to, you know, increase your social engagement. So unless I can spend, 1 hour of deep quality time with this person, then I can't do it. And so it doesn't have to be, it can be a 5-minute conversation. And that's 5 more minutes connecting to someone who's important to you, engaging socially, benefiting your brain that you wouldn't have had before. And again, don't forget about the people that you already have, the sort of support systems that you've already established. There are a few books that talk about brain health overall that I have here in the corner. And of course, that includes social engagement and the importance of that as well. But with that being said, I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank SBN for hosting another Brain Awareness Week and talking about, modifiable factors for brain health. And this point, I'll take any questions that may have showed up in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that talk, Dr. Pugh. We do have one question in the chat, and it's if a person has a Myers-Briggs score that shows strong introvert, how do they break that social barrier?
And I think that's a great question, because for someone that feels a bit more introverted or they find it more difficult to establish these relationships, it can be intimidating and it can sound almost impossible. But going back to what we talked about, where it's, what's important for you, like what would a quality social relationship look like for you? What would a good social network look like for you? That could be 3 people. It could be, your dog, your best friend from, high school, and someone else. But just continuing to nurture those relationships is very important too. And like I mentioned, it's not necessarily social network size. That may be a benefit for some people, but not for everyone.
Dr. Pugh, I'm wondering, well, first of all, thank you so much for your words. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how the things that you talked about may apply to a rural context. That is where I live right now, like at Purdue, it's very, very rural. And that has been something, like when I was doing my therapy training, that has come up with people in the past. In terms of like feeling very isolated where they lived before coming to campus, and then feeling very overwhelmed. There's a lot of people around. So for people who live in rural areas where you don't have neighbors like right next door, what would you say to them in terms of social support?
Oh, I love that question so much. That's something that I haven't thought about as much, but as it relates to diverse populations and social determinants of health, rural versus urban is a really big aspect of the conversation. And just answering this as one of the few times I've thought about this is that I think a part of it, to address a bit of the overwhelm with being in this urban environment, could be more of like a graduated approach, or having social support with you when you're going into an environment that may be a bit more overwhelming. But then, of course, there may be practical barriers to getting there. So thinking about within your community, even if you are kind of spaced far apart, like where are these areas where people meet, right? So, is there a community center? Is there a church? So where can you kind of seek out some of these more meaningful group activities, essentially? What thoughts, what has come up for you, like as you've talked to some of the rural patients and how they've had trouble with social connectedness?
I mean, a lot of times it's really that there's just absolutely nobody around,
Nothing.
like,
Okay.
miles and miles, and you still haven't found your neighbor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's to the point where I've had people say, like, I just don't lock my doors because there's no one around to steal from me, like, which is very
Yeah.
interesting to me. But it's really just the sense of isolation, and then like coming to a campus that has like 45,000 people. It's quite overwhelming, right? And
Yeah.
then you have these small towns, and there's like constantly feeling like you're under a spotlight when you are in these social spaces, because like a lot of times like there's that small town gossip stereotype in
Mm.
those towns. It's like you do one thing and people talk. So and then it's kind of like very big switch to kind of being lost in the sea of people. So that's been something that has come up from time to time as I've like gone through my training and doing my clinical
Yeah.
work. But I was just curious about your thoughts there. So thank you.
Yeah. And I wonder if for these people, part of it is just them reflecting on, like what would a good social support system look like for them? Like, what are they seeking? And
Right.
then, finding ways to get over some of these barriers to find that. So if it's quality, like maybe there are some people that are already in your life where you can invest a bit more in those relationships and improve that quality.
Right.
Or is it social network size? And then that's a different conversation.
Mhm.
But I think even like thinking about some of the intervention work and, where we need to move towards as a field, that will be important as well, taking into account the needs of rural people.
Right. We do have a question that popped up in the chat while
Mhm.
we were speaking. Um, any ideas on how the pandemic slash going virtual changed our social relationships and how that impacts brain health? Would you speak to that, please?
Yeah, that I think we're still gonna see, like, there's still this cohort of people that went through the pandemic at different age brackets. So if we think about the brain's development and how these social interactions can impact across the lifespan, I think there's still a lot for us to see longitudinally as to how that will impact brain health. But I think so many people felt socially isolated during that time. There was an increase in like trouble with mood, and that can impact brain health. And so I think overall, in addition to some of the more like infection related things and how contracting the infection can impact your brain and brain inflammation, we will start to see some of the longer lasting impact of some of these of the isolation. And then thinking about students that may have missed out on milestones. So, what does it mean for these students that missed out on prom or graduation or whatever it may be? And so I think we're gonna see some answers, but we're not there yet. But we have seen the beginning of what the impact is.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really interesting point in terms of the developmental piece, right? Because
Mhm.
socialization, it looks different from a 7-year-old versus a 14-year-old versus a 30-year-old, right? And so everyone's going to be impacted very differently. And taking a developmental approach, really, I think as neuropsychologists, really shifting the way in which we take that into consideration when we're sitting with people, right? So not just
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, you lived through the pandemic, but like, okay, like what age were you during the pandemic, and like what was
Yeah,
going on in your life during the pandemic? Like, oh, you were a senior and you couldn't go to prom, like wow, versus like, oh, you're the first in your family to graduate college and you couldn't walk, like wow, that's really impactful. So
right.
I think really like taking those developmental approaches and like really factoring that into that data collection piece when we are first meeting with people.
Yeah, and thinking about that, especially if you think about kindergarten, I can imagine, not going to kindergarten or
Yeah.
having to do kindergarten on a computer, and what that means, especially for social connectedness as we're starting to refine some of our social skills.
Right. Um, so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about social media, which of course is has controversial and not at the same time. But how does this fit in a little bit more? Is social media and those connections and relationships that people say they have, is that really social support? Like, how do people view that in science? Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not as familiar with that literature. I do know that it can be a good impetus for developing or like reconnecting with someone. So if it's someone you went to college with, they post about an engagement. It's like, oh, congratulations, how have you been? And so like from that standpoint, I can certainly see the benefit in how that can, add depth to some of these relationships, and how you can offer people even just like support on social media, as weird as it sounds. It's like, oh, congratulations on your engagement. That's something that makes people feel connected. It makes them feel good. As far as the quality more broadly, like outside of people that you're already connected to outside of social media, I can't really speak to that, but I'm sure there's levels to it, and that probably also depends on different like generational impacts. Anecdotally, it does seem that social media has a bigger impact on the younger generations, like Gen Z, younger more so than some of the older generations. And so maybe those relationships are a bit more meaningful to these younger generations.
Right. And I think that also what you briefly mentioned about like the quality, right? I mean, like just double tapping likes on someone's Instagram or, in someone's TikTok reel, like probably isn't going to sustain as much versus like, I'm thinking about like live chats on like Discord or something or on Zoom or, even just like Xbox Live, when you're playing games with people, like that has more substance to it than just, leaving a thumbs up on someone's Facebook profile. So I think it's also about the way in which you use social media,
Right.
as well as maybe the frequency, I suppose. But I feel like I couldn't have a conversation about social support without mentioning
Understandable.
just to pick your brain about it. But I think it's just moves so fast, and I think in my opinion, as scientists, I think it's hard for us to keep up with it in terms of like the way in which science works. I think social media just evolves so fast, and by the time you get your data, it just looks different. So it's I think that's
Exactly.
one of those things that's hard. That's not my area of expertise, so I'm speaking like as a little bit of an outsider, but yeah.
And I think that's such an important point, like
Yeah.
technology in general too. Like when we're trying to incorporate technology into like neuropsych or interventions, or and there are some interventions that try to incorporate technology for social support, but technology changes so fast. And by the time you've done your randomized control trial and written up the results, whatever it may be, things may look a lot different in the technological standpoint.
Right. And then I think we have time for just one more question.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, sorry, I just wrote it down here. I'm wondering if there are specific ways in which social support may look different between racial groups, right? And so what are maybe some things for us to consider there as we advocate for people? I mean, obviously, we don't want to assume that like, a very like colonized way of engaging with people is like a blanket for everybody. How do we take those things into consideration? What does social support look like between groups?
Yeah, and I think a big part of that would be like communication, right? And so communicating with the person that you're in these social connections with. But one way it may look different if someone is from a culture where, being like keeping their emotions to themselves, like that's more like prize or whatever, or something that they value, continuing to push like, oh, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? That could fracture your social connection with that person. Whereas someone from a background where it's expected that they'll talk about, their emotions, mental health, whatever it may be, that could be seen as more so of emotional support. And so just asking the person, sometimes it's like, hey, would you like to talk about this? Or, some people don't like hugs. It's like, can I hug you instead of going up and hugging people? Because that can also impact the social relationships, but it can certainly look different. And I would say quality. And so just continuing to think about like how can you add quality and depth to this relationship, and that may look different depending on their background.
Right. All right. Thank you for that. Anthony, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. I think if it would be helpful if maybe you could speak to whether or not it matters what type of specific social engagement people are engaging in, or if it really is just about how people are experiencing it and the quality they're gaining from the social relationship, or should people be focusing on specific social engagement acts versus other ones?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I wouldn't say that specific social engagement acts are more beneficial than others. And I personally take like a more personalized approach to a lot of these things, and especially like when it comes to interventions and a bit more of like a precision medicine type of approach, but thinking about like what social engagement would be most beneficial for you. And so if we go back to Jessica's example with the rural individuals, going to the mall probably like in New York City is probably not the type of social engagement that would be most meaningful or most beneficial for them. Whereas it could be like a walk in the park, maybe something that would be a bit more meaningful. And so I believe it's the act of continued social engagement and maintaining these relationships as opposed to like what you're actually doing is the most important. But there can be transference of benefits depending on what you're doing. So if you work out with friends, there are additional benefits that come with that in addition to the benefits conferred by the engagement itself.
Thank you.
All right. Well, just looking at our time, we are at 8:30 now. So I think this is a good place to end. Dr. Pugh, do you have any just final thoughts very briefly?
I just want to thank you all for having me, and I'm so happy that SBN has continued to have the Brain Awareness Week and advocate for brain health.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and hearing the words from Dr. Erika Pugh. I really hope that everybody has a nice night. And there's also going to be another one on this channel tomorrow night as well, same time, with a different speaker. And this is going to be recorded. And this is recorded and will be posted on the SBN YouTube. So thank you very much.